What is up, everybody? Week number 3 of NLL Weekly right here on YouTube. Anywhere your podcast can be found, Apple, Spotify, iHeart. You can find us there, NLL Weekly. So thank you so much for joining us, spending some time with us here as we talk all things Northern Lakes League, the premier athletic conference in Northwest Ohio for high schools. Chris Schmidbauer, Dan Naraki, always appreciate you guys spending some time with us. We're going to have in just a few minutes John Galyas, the head football coach for the Clay Eagles. We'll talk with him about his team's fast start to the season again, off to another 2-0 start for 2024. And we'll also talk about Mason Heinchel, how he's done, and the rest of the team, and kind of where they hope to end up when things are all said and done at the end of the year. Interesting week last week. Obviously, Dan, everything centered around Whitmer and Central Catholic, which we'll talk about in a little bit here. But really, that 27-17 score, I don't think, even though that's a fairly close game, still probably didn't really indicate how close that game ended up being and when all things were said and done.
Absolutely not. I think it's probably a better way to describe it as a tale of two halves.
Yeah.
Undoubtedly, on the Whitmer side, especially on the Whitmer side, offensively, because it seemed like right at the end of the second quarter into that through halftime and into the third quarter, something just started clicking for the Whitmer offense, and Central's defense was very good in the first two quarters.
Yeah. I think we lost Dan there for a second. There, you were off for a second, Dan. Go ahead and start. Keep going.
No, and they were able to still kind of force Whitmer a lot of times into third and long situations. But the Panthers kept finding ways to make those plays. Brady Ford kept finding ways to make throws that in the first half there were a handful of underthrown balls, especially right at the very beginning.
Yeah, it was interesting because I thought coming off of week 2, you weren't sure what you were going to see from Brady. You knew that week 1 was a good test, but week 2 was going to be a much tougher test. And when you look at the numbers, the raw numbers, essentially he threw for over 250 yards and 2 touchdowns, no turnovers, interception wise. He did fumble the ball twice. But when you consider that a year ago, he completed 5 of 17, and I think it was for like 25 or 27 yards, no touchdowns, and I think 2 interceptions. Granted, I will be fair to Central. That is not the same Central defense that we saw a year ago. That was a much more experienced Central defense, but he can still, to literally, basically, I don't even know what the timesing by 10 comment would be, but basically 10 times what you threw a year ago in one game versus what you were in 2023. Just a huge jump. So I think Central's good. A couple plays go a different way, and maybe we're talking about a different situation. But I'm really interested to see, again, how stuff plays out moving forward, because the nice thing about that game is that's a great bench test. And we can talk more in depth about that in a little bit. But again, that's a great bench test to know for both teams what it takes to be in the conversation. And I kind of have a theory or a hypothesis, I guess, that I'll put out there when we get into that, because there is something that I think coming out of that, when you look at what Whitmer's coaching staff should say and could say coming out of that game, is going to make a big difference depending on which way they go with that conversation. So I'm really interested to see how everything plays out with that. So a really interesting conversation to be had. But we're going to go ahead. Before we get started with John Galyas, want to thank our sponsors over at Car Stereo One, who our interview is always brought to you by. They are Toledo's best custom car stereo equipment supplier. They specialize in providing high-quality audio systems, speakers, and accessories for your vehicle. With a wide range of products and expert advice, they can help you upgrade your car's sound system. They also work on boats and motorcycles as well. Give them a call, 419-474-5553. Or check them out in person, 3120 Central Avenue, and then also online at carstereo1.com. So let's go ahead and bring in our guest for the week. He is the 8th year head football coach, I know, at Clay, and that is our friend John Galyas. John, thanks so much for joining us. How's everything going?
Pretty good, Chris. I really appreciate you having me on.
Well, I always love talking to you. You've heard me say this a million times over. You're one of my favorite people to talk to because I love what this program has become out in Clay. I grew up in Oregon. You have a nice smile, by the way. We won't do any shameless plugs there. Fun fact, my dad is John's dentist. But when you look at where this Clay program was when you took over and where it is today, it is just a night and day difference to see the stands packed on Fridays, to see the kids engaged, the community engaged. How gratifying has that been for you to see just that market improvement, that market change in those 8 seasons?
Yeah, it does make you feel really good. We've worked hard on certainly moving the program forward from when I took over. Now, we're hoping we see some results on the field. I mean, we've had some decent years, but we want to win championships. That's what we want to do, which is really the next step for our program is to be a contender year in, year out for a division championship in the NLL.
You're a Clay guy. You and I have talked about this before, but it really, to me, is an important part of the turnaround there as well, which is in the past, maybe Clay was seen as a stepping stone job, or maybe Clay, you found guys that were outsiders, but because you kind of were ingrained in the culture, you grew up in Oregon, you went to Clay, you understood, I think, how important it was to build the relationships on down. So it wasn't just starting when you came in freshman year. Being able to keep kids in your district is half the game. I think you would agree that being able to keep kids interested and invested in playing at Clay is huge. How did you go about trying to build those relationships on down? And have you, obviously you've seen it pay off because a lot of guys have stayed to play at Clay High School.
Yeah, I mean, we do a lot with as much as we can with our youth coaches and in our youth program or our rec program. Obviously, our junior highs, we have a little more control over. So we spend a lot of time with those guys, developing relationships. I go over there on Fridays when, we're not traveling too far or home games.
Sure.
I go to the junior high teams and talk to them. In the summer we do stuff with them. It's just, you do have to build those relationships. I do feel the last few years we've done a really good job of keeping Oregon kids here at Clay. I mean, we have done a much better job with that. And that's you have to. I mean, there's a lot of options out there, and they get hit in a million different directions, but we just kind of preach you're a Clay Eagle through and through, and so far it's worked for us.
But I think that's something that a lot of public school coaches don't understand, especially locally. As you said, there are a lot of opportunities, and there's a lot of different schools, and with open enrollment being a part of the factor for some of the school districts, a lot of guys don't get, you got to re-recruit your own kids. It's kind of like the portal a little bit on the college side, where you have to continue to make sure the kids stay invested, and you have to keep re-recruiting them every year, because kids are more fickle, I would say, than ever about wins and losses these days.
Oh, absolutely. So you definitely you're always recruiting your hallways. Same with your kids. You can't take anything for granted. Building those relationships too, that definitely helps. And that's something that we try really hard to do is build relationships with kids. And we do some different stuff. We did a team camp up at Grand Valley State this summer, which was awesome.
Yeah.
We took our guys up there. Not only was it great from a football perspective, it was just great from a team bonding perspective. What I mean? So we do some different things, and we try to, make it a family. And that's really what we're trying to do. Our guys always, one of our calls at the end of practice is, Clay on 3, family on 6. I mean, and that's something that we try to, we really believe in that.
You also do a really good job, what you mentioned with the kids too. I think you guys, including the kids on Fridays and having them be part of the tunnel and all those different things, having seen when you guys played Whitmer last year and then even a couple of years before when I was doing stuff for BCSN, you guys always figure out ways to, again, keep the kids involved from an early age. And if you can plant that seed early of, I want to be a Clay Eagle football player on a Friday night, boy, if you can get that to blossom, what a win that is for your community and the school in general.
Yeah, that's huge. Our community's been awesome. We had our youth night last Friday. It was great to see, the third through sixth graders with our rec program and our seventh and eighth graders. Just great to see them. And obviously we played really well, so that goes a long way. With that too, you make it cool to be a Clay football player, and that's what we're trying to do.
Well, off to a cool start again this year, 2-0. That Sandusky game, not nearly as, I guess, heart attack causing for you in week one as it was a year ago, but a good road win, I think, in week one, and then to come back and dominate Northview. In years past, I feel like teams that you've had may have, I don't want to say played down to competition, but certainly would have let teams hang around a little bit longer than you would have preferred. What have been some of the keys to the fast start again this year?
I think the biggest improvement we've seen is on the defensive side of the ball. We were not real good last year defensively. We were 2-0 last year at this point, but our two wins were by 8 points.
Sure.
This year, obviously, it feels a lot different. And we coming in, we had 9 offensive starters back. So, we felt pretty good about our offense. It was really on the other side of the ball, and our defense has been playing really, really well. It starts up front with our D-line. Our D-line's playing well. Our linebackers, I mean, really the whole defense is playing really well. And that's, I think, been the biggest difference.
Mason Heinchel has just taken off. And honestly, it felt like around week 3 last year, he got the Toledo offer pretty quickly around that same time. Then things just really, like I said, go up from there. He was a great kid to talk to when we had him on the show last year. And the thing I was so impressed about at that time was there might be kids who make that kind of ascension that he made and think, Toledo, that can't get any better. But literally the offers just kept rolling in, and no disrespect to Toledo, but to have a guy that is literally going to play at a Power 5 school that a year ago, I don't want to say he wasn't being recruited, but certainly was not on the radar the way he is now. What has he done in the last year that has allowed him to progress and mature at the rate that he's matured at as a quarterback?
I mean, he always has worked on his game in the off season. I mean, we've always seen that out of him. The last 2 years, he's been incredible as far as working on his game while he's playing basketball too, which is
right.
Awesome. In its own respects. And so he's always done that. The leadership role is definitely. He's definitely grown into that. As a sophomore, we had a pretty heavy senior offense that year. He was pretty quiet. You started to see it last year, and then obviously this year. I mean, he's our leader, especially on the offensive side of the ball. He knows our offense so well right now that he's another coach on the field. He'll come off on the sidelines and he'll suggest things. I mean, his football IQ is really, really high.
It's interesting that you say that. I was watching, and I know this is going to be sacrilege to you, but I was watching Chip Kelly talk about this with Will Howard last week. And he had said something about essentially when a quarterback comes over and starts telling you what they're comfortable running, you better run those things because that's what they're going to execute best. And it's probably got to be a nice relief for you and and Coach Ostrander and some of the other guys on that offensive side of the ball to have a guy kind of pitching suggestions saying, hey, I feel really good when we run this, or I feel really comfortable doing this, as opposed to you guys kind of trying to guess at what's going to work or what he's going to be comfortable running.
Yeah, absolutely. And he does that. He'll come over and he's like, hey, this is working. I like this. He does it. I mean, he sees the field so well. I mean, that's one thing. He extends plays to throw the ball. I mean, obviously there are times when he does run, but he's looking to throw the ball as he's extending the play, and he sees guys. I mean, it's really something you can't coach. I mean, it's just something that he has. I'm really glad that he's on our team, because I would hate to have to defend somebody like that. And obviously the quarterbacks we see in our league are good enough as it is. So, I'm really glad we don't have to defend him. But he's got like that uncanny ability to see the field while he's running around back there, that it's just unbelievable.
It's interesting you brought up the quarterback play in the league, because I've had a lot of conversations with people, and you obviously were a part of the old Three Rivers Athletic Conference, and I can't remember a league, even when it was the track or even in the old City League, where you had 6-7 guys at quarterback, and obviously Ryan Montgomery going down is a shame, but literally all of that talent at quarterback in a league like that, and you've got guys going to Division I schools or Division I AA schools. I can't remember a year when there's been so much talent at the quarterback position in a league like this is this year.
Yeah, it's crazy. And I mean, every week you're seeing a guy, I mean, every week it's crazy. And obviously they have different talents. I mean, some guys are better runners. Some guys can make every throw possible. As a defensive guy, that's tough, to go through that gauntlet that we go through every week in our league.
Obviously, Mason's not the only guy that's gotten you guys off to a hot start. Troy Hazuda, I think, who gets lost in the shuffle. And Mason, to be fair to him, was one of the first people to make sure that he mentioned when we talked to him last year about how critical Troy is, and Hudson, who we'll talk about in a minute. But what does Troy bring to the table? He's a guy that's played as a wide receiver for a couple of years. He seems to be one of Mason's favorite targets. Talk about his work ethic and what he does on the field for you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. Troy's a 3-year starter for us. Playing a little bit of defense for us this year. Another high character young man. We just love him to death. He's become a much better leader too. But he puts in a lot of time in the off season to work on his game too. He is. I think when teams game plan for us, I mean, he's a guy that you need to know where he's at. On the field, because he is a big part of our offense.
Another guy in Hudson Byers too, kind of the same thing. A lot of times I think coaches don't necessarily game plan with the tight end in mind. That is clearly not the case there. Hudson is a terrific tight end, also a really good linebacker for you guys as well. What does he add from a leadership standpoint? What does he add on the field for you guys?
Yeah, I mean, Hud, again, another high character guy, man. I mean, it's I will say our senior class is they're big. I mean, numbers wise, and it's just they're really good kids. It's a tight knit group, just a great group, and Hud is definitely part of that. He has really grown into a football player. His first year playing football was his freshman year of high school.
Oh wow!
So he hasn't played a whole lot of football, and he's really grown into his role at tight end and at linebacker. I mean, that's something that this year you see him out there, and he brings some physicality definitely when he's out there. I mean, when he hits you, usually you're going backwards, which is pretty awesome.
You mentioned it, 30 seniors on this team, probably one of the bigger senior classes in all of Northwest Ohio. To have that amount of experience, that amount of leadership, and guys who I think know what to expect and probably don't panic when things aren't going the right way, and probably also don't get too high when things are. How valuable is it to have that much experience on a team like this?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of those seniors, I mean, obviously they're playing for us. They've played for us in the past, so they've been through it. As I mentioned earlier, we lost a lot of close games last year, and they went through that. I think kind of as a group, they just kind of said, hey, no more. So we'll see how this year plays out. But we definitely love our seniors. We've always kind of said you win with your seniors.
Yeah.
And to have, this big a group, again, we have not had this at Clay High School in a heck of a long time, this number of seniors. So, that's another reason why we're really excited for this year.
Well, and it speaks again to what we said of being able to keep guys in district. That just shows, and it probably makes you feel good because it shows that those efforts are paying off as time goes on. It's not just done in vain. You are getting those opportunities to keep guys, and they're sticking around because things are going well.
Right. And I mean, our numbers are up. We're 80 plus 10 through 12, which we haven't had that in a long time. Our freshman group is a really good group. So, there are really good days ahead for us. I mean, there are good young players in this program, besides our seniors that, are kind of waiting their turn because of our senior group. So we're definitely excited, for the future as well.
You mentioned it, close losses last year. And when I was going through, I did not realize just how close you guys were to winning the Cardinal Division last year. You lose in overtime by a point to Napoleon. You are a touchdown behind Southview at the end of the game. That easily, and we were talking about this with the Whitmer Central game, couple plays go a different way in both of those games, and you guys could have been Cardinal Division champs last year. That's how close you were.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we were, Napoleon, you lose that in 3 overtimes. That's a heartbreaker. The Southview game, we had a chance at the end to tie it up, and we didn't get it done. Even the Fremont game where we lost by a couple touchdowns, but that game at the end, we had a chance to tie it up, and we didn't get it done. So, we were there. This year we got to get over the hump. I mean, that's kind of been the mantra. Is we got to finish games.
You hit on it because you and I talked about this last year too. This program, it feels like in recent years, has gotten off to really good starts, and that's fantastic. But like you said, even last year, nobody cares how you start; it's how you finish. And if there's ever going to be a group that can get you over the hump, you hope that it's 30 seniors essentially that can get you to that point.
Absolutely. You're right. Absolutely. I mean, that's again, why we're so excited is those guys, and they've played so much for us that, we got to get it done this year. I mean, it's, with all those guys.
When you look at the first year in the Northern Lakes League and the 2 divisions, it was interesting kind of wondering how everybody was going to adjust to that, because some folks may not have liked it. Some folks probably did. Did you feel like the guys were more engaged later in the year? Because we had talked about this again with the track where Whitmer Central decided it, and that was the end of the conversation. And sometimes that game happened in week 4 or week 5, and then there really wasn't anything to talk about the rest of the year. Not that you guys couldn't have made some waves, but obviously it was always going to be really tough. Did the guys stay bought in knowing that there was a league title that could have been on the line throughout the year as opposed to years past?
Oh, absolutely. And the way the schedule sets up, really, our division play doesn't start until week 6.
Yes.
So, obviously we got 3 tough ones in a row coming up, but in the big picture, they don't mean anything as far as, league play goes. So, really week 6, it's the season starts. I mean, we're playing our division opponents. So we definitely saw last year that our guys were way more engaged later on in the season because we're playing meaningful games.
Yes. And you hit on something, because that was the beauty, I think, of the league last year, where every week there was something. And the fact that week 10 on the Buckeye side, it went down to the last week, and
Yeah.
who was it going to be a three-way tie? Who was going to win? Same thing with Napoleon and Southview. Just nothing against the track. It just didn't have that kind of mystique unless Whitmer and Central were playing in week 10, unfortunately.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I think it's obviously it's great for Northwest Ohio to have its biggest league,
Yeah.
you know, going down to the wire. You know, I mean, it's great for those communities. It's just, you know, it's great for high school football.
I mentioned you're a Clay guy. One of the things I love that you said when you started at Clay was essentially, I'm not here just to coach football. I'm here to be the head football coach at Clay. Like, yeah, I can be a head coach anywhere, but I want to be the head football coach at Clay. What does Oregon City Schools, the Clay community, mean to you as a person?
So yeah, I mean, I owe so much to the schools. You know, big part of my life, obviously growing up, had great teachers, great coaches coming through the Oregon City Schools. You know, other than my dad, you know, those guys had the biggest influence on my life. You know, this is the only place I wanted to teach and coach. And, you know, obviously it's worked out for me. I just, you know, lived here all my life, and it just means so much to me. I'm just glad that, you know, I can give back a little bit
Sure.
to our community that's given me so much.
When I said 8th year, I know that can be a situation where some guys feel like they've been doing it for 20, and some guys have been doing it like it was yesterday. Does it
Right.
feel like it's been 8 years, or has it flown, or does it flown by for you?
Not really. It's gone by really, really fast. You know, and now obviously 8 years into it, you know, you run into guys from those first couple teams, and they're out. You know, they got families, and you know they're out in the workforce, and
Sure.
you see them, you know, out there, and I mean, it's like, man, I mean, it makes you feel good. Also makes you feel a little old, but you know, we're you know, I love what I do, and I'm going to keep doing it until I don't love it, I guess.
Well, you're probably a few years away from this, but I'm sure it'll start where kids whose dads played for you are going to start showing up on the team at some point.
Yeah, you know, I get that now a little bit with teaching. You know, I mean, they're coming, hey, you know, my mom had you, or my dad had you. Like, oh man, I mean, you know, you start to really make me feel old.
You can keep that to yourself, basically, as I'm sure what's said. Little Brown Jug on the line this weekend. I always bring this up. I know that the Jug has not been there in a while. You've played for the Jug.
Yeah.
Whitmer and Clay probably doesn't have the same cachet anymore, just because a lot of the people who were around when it
Right.
was a closer rivalry in the GLL days, just it's not that close anymore. It hasn't been that close anymore. How difficult is it sometimes to relay to the kids about the fact that this is a meaningful thing? And I think it's hard on both sides. And I say that as a product of St. Francis, where I don't think anybody that is on Bancroft even knows what the Irish Night looks like anymore. So I think it's not always the easiest to get kids to be excited about it. Is it hard to keep the kids invested, or are they all invested on winning that Little Brown Jug?
I tell you, this senior group is invested. I mean, and that's the one nice thing. Certainly in years past, it's been tough. This year, you know, we've had good week of practice. So you know that's exciting. But you know, it is tough because obviously it has been one-sided
Yeah.
lately for sure. You know, we know what they are. I mean, they're a really, really good football team. You know, their offensive line is big. They maul you. I mean, it's you know, obviously it starts with Carter Lowe, but the other guys are really good too. Talented quarterback, talented wide receivers. I mean, the running backs. I mean, offensively, they are a really, really good football team. On defense, they fly around. Obviously, Napoleon Jamison, everybody knows about him. I mean, he's you know, a Division I guy. So you know, we know obviously what they're all about. We look at this, obviously it's a tremendous opportunity for us.
Sure.
to go out and kind of see where we're at, because we know what kind of program they are. I mean, they're one of the best programs in Northwest Ohio, and we kind of want to see where we stack up. We know we obviously playing there too is not easy, so we got our work cut out for us. But I think our guys are going to embrace the challenge, and hopefully we play our best game on Friday.
But you mentioned that kind of measuring stick, and I believe that's really where these early Buckeye Division, Cardinal Division crossovers probably come in handy, because if you want to get into the playoffs, if you want to make a run, maybe you won't have a team that's as good as Whitmer, but at some point you will run up against a team that's that good. And
Absolutely.
How do we stack up? What do we have to do to win those games? And the beauty of that is you can always point back to, and I was talking about this on Friday when Whitmer lost to Central, the same thing of, this is what you have to be if you want to make a run in the playoffs, because everybody's good once you get to week number 11. And this provides you that opportunity to have film and say, guys, this is what we need to be, or this is how we have to stack up.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think, obviously whatever happens Friday, this game's going to help us down the road, no matter what, win or lose. It's good to play really good quality opponents. And obviously, these next 3 weeks, we're playing really good quality opponents. We might be playing the best one first. I mean, obviously that's yet to be seen. We do know they're really good. So, we're going to kind of find out what we're made of for sure.
Playoffs was a place that you got to last year. Obviously, the expanded field certainly helped. Not the way you wanted things to go, obviously, in the first round, but how much does getting a taste of that last year? Not that the guys didn't get it in 20, but I wonder how seriously people take that since everybody got in. But the fact that you were able to get there and went on the road and kind of saw what that experience is like, how valuable was that coming back this year, knowing, okay, guys are they got the taste of it, and hopefully they're hungry for some more of it?
Yeah, well, actually, the last 2 years we've made the playoffs, so that's
right.
been.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
So that our senior group, sophomore, junior years, they've been in the playoffs. We probably played our best half of football in our playoff game, the first half of the playoff game last year against Olmsted Falls. We were up 12-10 at halftime. And we played really, really good. Our defense, was playing its heart out that first half. Things fell apart in the second half, and we had a couple turnovers that really hurt us. Obviously, Olmsted Falls is a team that runs triple options, so that's something that we don't see a lot of. And they're a team that likes long drives. And so we come out the second half, they get the ball and they score. But then we turn the ball over right away, and so our defense is back on the field, and we're in a tough spot. So that hurt us. But the experience has been, the last 2 years has been really, really good. Our guys, it no longer now is it good enough just to get there. We want to win, and it would be, we want to host a game. Those are the goals. It's not just good enough. Hey, we made the playoffs. We want to play to week 12, week 13, week 14. We want to make a run. So the experience has been really good.
Is that kind of the next evolution, or what you want to do at this point, where, okay, we've gotten it back to respectable. How do we make it from respectable to a winning, consistent winning program? Because I think you're there, and I think the talent's there. It's just a matter of, you said, I would say old habits die hard. And not that the guys have bad habits, but when you don't expect to win, it's hard when you're expected to win to learn how to take everybody's best shot, to have that target on your back. Is that kind of where this group was maybe at last year, and what you're hoping they're able to overcome? Is you have to, in order to beat good teams, you have to play really well. And it's not always the easiest thing to do. So you got to figure that stuff out.
Yeah, absolutely. Number one goal is win the division. Obviously that's our number one goal. We feel like if we win the division, we're in the playoffs. So that kind of takes care of itself. But then obviously we want to play know, 12 games, 13 games. I mean,
Yeah.
that's what we want to do. And so that's the next step is, we've played 11 games. We know what that's all about, but let's see what it's like to play week 12. Let's see what it's like to play week 13. That's kind of where, the next step is.
Well, I'll let you go. I do appreciate the time, and I'm not just saying this. I really do. I love talking with you, and I've said that every year. It's great, and I appreciate what you did out there because I do remember being younger and seeing a kind of a bare Ted Federici field and not seeing
Oh
people
yeah.
engaged, and to be able to come back there a couple of years ago when you guys were undefeated and so was Fremont Ross early in the year and see
Yeah.
that place packed was really a sight to behold and see the kids and the parents. I mean, it was standing room only, John. I mean, that's just absolutely great to see the community finally kind of embrace it, but it doesn't happen if you don't kind of embrace what you've embraced. So I do appreciate the time and congratulations on the success so far. And can't wait to stop down and say hello to you on Friday.
All right. I appreciate it, Chris. As always. Yeah. And I look forward to seeing you on Friday as well.
All right. Thanks, John. We'll see you.
Thank you.
That was Clay football head coach John Galyas. We appreciate his time with us here on NLL Weekly. As I said, always one of my favorite people to talk to because, again, to take a program in the position that John was in when he took that program over, not the easiest thing. And Dan, we've seen this on the college side, we've seen it on the pro side. To have literally a culture change, to take a situation where nobody wants to play football at Clay and to make it a desirable thing to do, what a treat that is to watch. And as I said, to see the community, see the kids embrace that, just always a neat thing. I know you've seen it. We've seen it on all different kinds of levels. Just a fun experience to see when a guy can take something that's broken and put it back together and have some success with it.
Absolutely. And I think coach is actually really humble when he talk, you
Yeah,
guys
he's
were
a little
talking
modest,
about
which I
that.
appreciate. But yeah, I mean,
Because it's a lot of effort to make a culture shift anywhere really, but especially in a program like a high school football where again at most you have a chance to kind of teach and have your players grow, and you have 4 years, you have a start date
yeah.
and an end date, and to be able to find a way to put that effort in to grow that change and then also to make sure that it can continue. It's impressive no matter what.
And to also kind of get that it's a community thing. That's another thing a lot of coaches don't understand when you coach at a public school is that it's not just getting kids to buy in when they're freshmen. It's about getting kids to buy in when they're in 7th grade and when they're in 6th grade and be excited to be and go to Clay High School or whatever district you're in. That's not the easiest piece. And a lot of times there's a lot of late nights going to, Facet Junior High in Oregon for them or Eisenhower or heading to one of the grade schools and all that good stuff, going to the rec league, all those pieces that guys don't realize that you may not be quote unquote recruiting, but you are recruiting and trying to keep kids interested and invested in your district, which is not the easiest thing to always do.
No, and it's also you're doing it at an unfortunately in a district that is not necessarily like first of mind when you think of
Sure.
football in
Sure.
Northwest Ohio. But that's changed. That also says something about the job that he's doing is changing that perception inside the building, and it's starting to change the perception outside now.
Yeah, having a Division I Power 5 quarterback on your roster certainly
Yeah.
helps, and I hope that Mason can continue to play well. Obviously, not too well on Friday, but
Right.
that's a selfish reason. Again, you're listening to the NLL Weekly Podcast. Myself, Chris Ribauer, Dan Naraki, again covering Northwest Ohio's premier athletic conference. You can watch us live on YouTube. We tape 7 o'clock on Wednesdays, roughly. You can watch the show live as we tape it, or of course, you can check it throughout the week. It'll be archived afterwards. Or again, Apple, Spotify, iHeart should be all up there at this point. Just search NLL Weekly, should be able to pull up the episodes as we go through. Let's get into week 2 a little bit. I do want to go back to that Whitmer Central game again. 27-17, Central beats Whitmer. I had said it at the beginning. Again, a couple plays go different ways in that ball game at some critical junctures, really, and this is a totally different outcome. I don't think anybody would have said it was the cleanest of games, meaning penalty-wise was pretty egregious. Both teams were over 150 yards of penalties. Hot night, a lot of guys cramping, so the pace of the game really went askew in that third quarter. But the three critical plays that I come back to is Brady Ford's fumble on the goal line in that third quarter, the fumble inside the 10-yard line in that first half that set up Central's first touchdown, and then the pick six that got wiped off from Charles Isom, supposedly because of a block in the back that was literally 30 yards behind the play, 40 yards. Some guys said 60. It's against the rules, I understand, but in the grand scheme of things, does it affect the outcome? You can argue that all day if you want. But those three critical plays essentially account for 21 points. And if you add 2 touchdowns to Whitmer's score and you take 7 away from Central's score, obviously it's a different outcome.
Well, there's two things that stick out to me about those both as well. And first, on that interception that was pulled back, and as you mentioned, the call being made way behind the play, and we see it a ton. And you always have that question, like, yeah, I guess it happened, but are you sure you saw it happen from the other side of the field? That's either here nor there. But the other thing, and it was Brady Ford's fumble, and I said this to you on the way out that night, is I am shocked how quickly he got back up, because that play happened right in front of me on the sideline, and hearing that hit immediately, like, well, he's got to be done for the game. He's got to come out and pass protocol, and he popped up. And it looked like it was one of those cases where he was more frustrated with the outcome of the play than hurt by the hit.
Yeah, I mean, and that's something I know probably the coaches worked with him this week on. Don't focus on that. Again, focus on the things you did well. Obviously, you want to improve, but that can't be your entire focus, because, again, when you throw for 250 yards and a couple of touchdowns against Central, that should be something that's celebrated. I mean, Whitmer put up 350 yards of total offense, which I think he'd be hard-pressed to find a game where a team put up that kind of yardage outside of when Central's played in like the state semifinals or state championship games. And even then, I'm going to guess there are seasons where they haven't allowed that many yards in a football game. So that's not a team I would want to face in week 9 or week 10, because by that point, they're going to be really good and they're going to be experienced more so than they are now. But man, again, a couple plays go a couple different ways. But the one thing that John Galyas hit on, and it kind of led into what the point I wanted to make, was the beauty of that game last week. This is, and you've heard me say this on our broadcast on Q105. You've heard me say it just off the air as well. There have been a lot of comparisons to some of the teams at Whitmer that have made deep runs in the playoffs. And in order to do that, I think this team needs to understand just how razor thin the margin for error is in those games. When we got back last Friday, I said to Coach Winters, everybody's good in week 11, and you're there for a reason. It might be a little more watered down now, but even if you want to say that once you get to the second round, it's better, fine. However you want to phrase it. But eventually, at some point, you're going to play a good football team in the playoffs. And sometimes it comes down to 3, 4, 5 plays that decide the outcome of a game. And you can run, between the two teams, you can run 80, 90 plays, and only a handful of them are the ones that decide the outcome. That's the first thing. The second thing is Whitmer didn't play their best, made some mistakes, had a couple turnovers, and still were within 10 points of a team. And really, again, one of those turnovers goes for a touchdown, and it's 20-17 instead of a touchback in the end zone, and Central goes down and scores to make it 27-10. But you're literally a play away from cutting that back to 3. And after you really had not played all that well up until that point, you're right there. So the talent's there. Can we be perfect? I remember when I was at Ohio State, Coach Tressel used to run around and yell, be perfect all the time. And I remember used to think like that I don't think that does anything. I don't understand what that means. But the older I get, the more I understand of, yeah, you're not going to be perfect, but you really got to strive to be if you want to be competitive and make a run in the state playoffs. And you got to be as perfect as you possibly can be if you want to beat good teams. And if you're not, that's usually what costs you a game. And that's something I hope, as somebody who is obviously invested in Whitmer's football season personally, I hope to see them make that adjustment, because I don't want to say they're not going to be challenged the rest of the way, because Perrysburg will be tough. Anthony Wayne will be tough. I think this week will be tough. Southview won't be easy by any stretch. But on paper, talent-wise, there aren't a lot of teams that are going to stack up with them talent-wise the rest of the year in the regular season. But when you get to those playoffs, who knows who you're going to face? And we saw last year, again, it comes down to one play really against Perrysburg. Whitmer plays awful all game, rallies in the fourth quarter, scores 2 touchdowns, inches away from walking off with a touchdown to win the game, off by a couple inches on the throw. And that's the end of your season. So it really is a margin for error that is very, very razor thin.
And not to mention having a game like this early on in the season. Is it, and the reason it's important is because the lessons you learn in week 2 are the ones you apply in week 11, 12, and 13.
Well, that's what you hope anyway.
Yeah.
I mean,
well, again,
that's the ideal way to do it. The other game that I thought was interesting, Southview, or excuse me, not Southview, Findlay. They're playing Southview this week. Findlay loses to Lima Senior last week. Last second, lost 35-31. And we'll talk about it more when we preview the game. But where I would be really concerned if I'm Findlay was not the play of Riley Korkos, the sophomore quarterback who's come in and will play for Ryan Montgomery the rest of the year. It was the defense. The defense gave up 354 yards passing, 4 passing touchdowns in that ball game. And one of the things that changed Findlay last year and what allowed them to be so competitive late in the year was the defense. And if that group is going to try and do that old Findlay, we're going to be in a shootout the entire time, you're not going to win a lot of football games. And that's going to be really, really tough if you are Findlay, if you're giving up 350 yards of passing and 4 passing touchdowns. And that's not to mention what happened on the ground either.
Well, and that's where you have to completely change the character of your football team. In that case, you know now that the offense can go, but is it going to go at the same pace, at the same rate that it would have been if Brian Montgomery is back there? Clearly not. So you have to put some more emphasis on making a stops. And even if just we talked about it a lot in week 1 in trying to emphasize, to plan to make an offense one-dimensional.
Yeah.
If the pass is going to be the problem, then make sure you're not allowing those runs. Make sure you have got guys stacked in the box. And if you're not going to be able to try and do that, it's gonna be a long season.
Absolutely. And the job only gets tougher this week, because we'll talk about it in a few minutes here, but Southview's on the docket this week. And what would have been a game maybe 2 weeks ago that you say, well, Southview probably not going to be very close on that one. They weren't a year ago. I think Southview's good, but they lost a lot on the defensive side. You wonder, okay, how good are they going to be? And, Findlay's going to be able to move the ball. All of a sudden, that game takes on an entirely different tone when you have Ryan Montgomery not in that football game. So we'll talk about that in a few minutes. Anthony Wayne, a big win over St. John's. They absolutely dusted the Titans on the Fred Beyer dedication night over at St. John's, a really dominant win. John Galyas, who we just talked to, his Clay Eagles absolutely dominated Northview. Southview, we weren't surprised, kind of blew overweight. Liberty Center Napoleon, that was one where after we talked to Tyler Swery last week, I wasn't 100% sure how in that game Napoleon would be. And that was actually a little bit closer, I think, than 31-7 looks, because if memory serves, that was like a 13-7 game at halftime. I think the second half got away from Napoleon a little bit. Good to see Springfield get their first win. It's going to be tough sledding the rest of the year for them after this week. So they have to win those City League games if they want to be able to get on the winning side of things. And then the last one, I think, was good to see Fremont Ross get the win over Sandusky last week, 21-14, getting a good win for them over the Blue Streaks at their place last week. So all good scores, all things that it'll be interesting again. And also Bowling Green getting that first win for Coach Sean Kiss in his first year as head coach down there at Bowling Green too. So before we start looking into week number 3, I want to say thank you to our other sponsor. That's Victory Auto Mall. Again, if you are looking for a new vehicle, Victory Auto Mall is your trusted used car dealer in Toledo. Whether you're shopping for that first car, your 10th truck, their staff will provide outstanding service in a no-pressure environment. Their only goal, to find you a great vehicle that matches your lifestyle and service you well for years to come. Victory Auto Mall has an established exemplary reputation in the community, and they are a buy here, pay here kind of dealership. Their top priority, helping you get the vehicle that you want. You can contact them via phone 419-345-3603. You can also check them out online at WeFinanceCarsToday.com and their physical location, 1632 West Lasky Road, right next to the Tuffy there on Lasky Road at the corner of Lasky and Jackman. So I'm going to turn things over to Daniel, and we'll start going through week number 3 and some of the games that are coming up this weekend.
Alrighty. We mentioned Perrysburg a little bit ago, so we will start there as they welcome in the Fremont Ross Little Giants, picking up their first win a week ago, as we see while Perrysburg rolled over Marysville, a team that we weren't really sure what they were bringing up I-75. I mean, Carson Caden was good last week against Sandusky, but this Jackets defense will be the best that Ross has seen so far.
For sure. When you start off the season and have a tough go of it in week 1 and lose the way that Fremont Ross did, and then you come back and get that win, that's always big. And I had said last week going into that game, I thought it was really important to make sure that Fremont Ross took care of business at home, because there aren't going to be a lot of games prior to getting into that Cardinal division that I feel are real winnable games for the Little Giants. It's going to be really tough. We saw that last year. So to get the win is good. That's going to be a really good Perrysburg defense that they have seen. Interesting fact about that game against Marysville for the Yellow Jackets, 2 defensive touchdowns in that game, a pick 6 and I think a return fumble for a touchdown. And both of those obviously inflate the score of 37-0. But overall, that Perrysburg team has played really well in their first 2 games. A little bit closer against St. Francis, but not nearly as close as folks in Marysville certainly would have hoped for last week. Fremont Ross has to be ball security. They can't turn the ball over. They have to focus on making sure that when they have possession of the football, they keep possession of the football and trying to slow down. TJ Tackett's got rolling a little bit throwing the football last week. Not going to be easy for them on the defensive side for the Little Giants as well to be able to slow down that offense. So it's going to be a tough task for Fremont Ross down there in Wood County. And I think the Yellow Jackets will be too much. But the nice thing was you got the one that was winnable for them last week. And that's the important thing, is when you have the opportunity to win, that you get those wins when they can happen. There's nothing worse, I think, as a coach, to have a game that on paper you should have, if you will, and then to not be able to get that win, because they go Perrysburg, then they're Whitmer, and then at Findlay, and then you roll right into Cardinal division play, and they start off with Napoleon and Clay and Southview. So they have their 3 toughest games, I would say, right in a row in the Cardinal division as well. They're going to have to make sure that they come out and get them when they can, and that's a good first step. Perrysburg, I'm not really sure they're going to be really tested until next week when they'll play Southview. But again, I look at Fremont Ross, and I think the Jackets will probably handle them fairly easily.
Probably, but as you mentioned, it's a bit of a measuring stick game for Ross. If they can stay
Absolutely.
in this one,
Absolutely.
that puts them in a really good spot going
sure.
forward in that schedule.
Yeah, for sure. It gives you some of that confidence moving into subsequent weeks if you are.
More Wood County action as Bowling Green gets set to host Anthony Wayne. And Bowling Green with a nice bounce back win over Fostoria after getting routed themselves in week 1. And Anthony Wayne also doing their fair share of routing, taking out St. John's. I'm pretty sure we're going to say the same thing. It's going to be a game where the Generals can roll, but the Bobcats can find out where they're going to stand as they get into divisional play.
For sure. Bowling Green, again, we talked about those two running backs, Jay Shannon, and I'm drawing a blank on the other young man's name, but both of those guys, there's a 1-2 punch in the backfield for the Bobcats. Good win over Fostoria. As I said, you've got to get the wins when they're available to you. That was exactly what the Bobcats did last week, was they got the wins when it was present to them. You wonder, once they are done here, Bowling Green's got Springfield next week. That's a winnable game for the Bobcats. And then they go to they're home against Northview. That's another winnable game for Bowling Green. So they don't quite have the gauntlet to go through like a Fremont Ross does to get to divisional play. This is one where, as you said, you're going to find out really quickly where you stack up in that pecking order. Bowling Green was pretty close in some of those games last year. We'll see if they can keep that up. But Anthony Wayne has played really well so far. I imagine they're going to continue to play really well, and I expect him to do so at Bowling Green on Friday.
Moving a little further to the West, I almost forgot how a map worked. As Northview hits there to take on Napoleon, and a year ago, this was a tight one. Napoleon came out on the short end of the stick, but it's a new day out in Henry County. Yes, it is.
No doubt. And this is one that Tyler Swery is going to want, because I feel like when we talked to him last week, that one still bugs him a little bit. And he even said that we started to learn things when we lost to Napoleon to Northview. And you could tell that one still kind of stings a little bit, because that was one where they were right there and just couldn't get over the finish line. Going to Henry County, going to Napoleon to take on the Wildcats, different environment there. Northview's just really struggling right now, and that's not to denigrate what Greg Silm does, but when you talk about winnable games, this is one where if Northview is serious about making strides this year, they have to be competitive in this one, and I might say they have to win this one. There is a lot on the line when you consider the fact that if they're not going to win this game, it's going to be really tough for them to claim one at all. And the last thing you want to do is finish 0-10. I don't think anybody wants to be in that boat. And Northview, in my mind, this is one that they have to get this week, because when you have these crossover games, you have to get it this week. You got to get it against Bowling Green, and you've got to be able to play against those smaller school teams and get things done. Curious to see the way that Napoleon comes into that game. I know they're going to be fired up. Can they hang with Northview? Bigger school, bigger kids in theory, but that is just such a hard-nosed Napoleon team. I think I would go with the Wildcats in this one, but as I said, Greg Silm's group, if they want to get some momentum going, they've got to get this one on Friday.
And there is a big difference between 0-3 and 1-2.
For sure.
Springfield taking on another City League team as they hit the road to take on Start after getting their first win in a low-scoring affair last week at Rogers. Headline: Gabe Gregory running for 186 yards and a touchdown on 20 carries. But this is a Start squad that did put up some points against Clyde. Yeah. So, looking at the way that both of these teams like to operate, this is absolutely going to be a clock management game.
Well, it starts with Springfield. I mean, I wanted to make sure that we highlighted Gabe Gregory, because 186 yards on 20 carries and a touchdown. I don't care who it is against. That's a good week. That's a great week. I mean, that's 9 yards a carry. That's a phenomenal evening. So congratulations to Gabe and the Springfield group for getting that win last week. As you mentioned, Start puts up points. They scored 25 against Clyde, who's usually pretty good. That was a 44-25 game. I look at Start, and I think Start can score quicker than what Springfield can right now. 16-8 kind of tells you that it was low scoring, kind of in the trenches. When you're averaging 9 yards a carry, I'd continue to feed my tailback too if I'm LaCharles Smith. That I don't have a problem with. The question is, can Springfield duplicate that performance on Friday? And that's the number one question I have. Can you start gouging this Start team on the ground. This is a game where, as you said, when you look at this Start Spartan team, they're 0-2 coming into this week. 0-3 looks a lot different than 1-2 does, and I agree with you. This is one I think Start can get. It's at their place. BCSN is going to be out there on Friday. It's the main game of the week. They're going to be live on TV. This is a big one, probably the biggest that you will see all year for Start moving forward, as far as prime time being, the spotlight on them kind of situation. Springfield has to be able to control the clock. They have to be able to control the ground game and keep the ball out of Start's hands. They were able to do that against Rogers last week. If they can do that, I think they'll have a successful night at Start. I do think the Spartans could get them, though. They are a better team than Rogers. So this will be close, I think.
A game that, as you mentioned 2 weeks ago, was in a completely different place as Southview hits the road, heads down I-75 to take on Findlay. And, we talked a bit about their loss to Lima Senior and Southview cruising overweight. So we will find out how good Findlay is in kind of recovering after 2 weeks. I think you got an idea that, all right, this team has got to re-gel after losing such a big part of it and come back together. We know that Southview is capable of putting up the points, and Findlay is. I was saying that Findlay's defense was having some issues stopping Lima Senior. So, can that defense put itself together to stop the Cougars?
And Southview's a really good throwing team. I mean, you look at Will Macy's, the job he's done. Their tailback's really good as well. That's one where Findlay, I don't think, can be any lower than they are right now as far as probably morale in that locker room. It's one thing to lose to Central. I don't think anybody was surprised by that. But a year ago, this is kind of where things righted themselves, was in week 2. And outside of that heartbreaking loss to Anthony Wayne at their place, Findlay kind of cruised last year. I mean, it really was an easier season for Findlay, one of the easier seasons they've had in some time. And Stephen Adams and his staff have their work cut out for him down there, because it'd be one thing if they had lost last week and it was like 14-7 or 17-14 or something like that, where it was a low scoring game and you say, okay, we're still breaking in a quarterback. We're still trying to figure things out with a sophomore. We're still reinventing ourselves on offense. That's going to come. But at least the defense kept us in that game. That wasn't the case last week. The offense had to keep Findlay in the football game. 31 points against Lima Senior is not the hardest feat in the world, but it's not an easy feat either. And you give credit to that offense, who, again, is trying to figure out who they are again. And they're really high on Riley Corcos. That was the one thing as I was reading this week, kind of doing a little background and researching stuff for week 3. That's a Findlay staff that's really excited about him. Obviously, the plan was not to play him this year, but next year, it was his show to run. They were all in on Riley Corcos. So, I mean, don't think that just because it's a guy that is starting not when they planned on doing it, that it's some kind of scrub off the bench. This is a kid that they're really excited about and thinks can do big things down the road. But this is not how they envision rolling him out. And I just think if you're Southview, you have to like where you're at going into this game. You rolled last Friday. You rolled week 1. You're healthy. This was a blowout a year ago. You got absolutely housed at your place. And you're going down there, and can you return the favor? And we talked about this with John Galyas, but I think the same can be said with Steve Hardy over at Southview. That's a program that's had a renaissance, a reemergence under Steve. And Steve's done a great job of putting Southview from nobody wants to play there to respectable. And they're on that verge. They're right on that line of, can we go from respectable to winning program again? This game, and I don't care who the quarterback is, this game would go a long way for Southview to say, look out, rest of the NLL. we're not just dangerous in the Cardinal division, we're dangerous in the Buckeye division. They almost had that win last year. You and I were present for it. They almost got that against Whitmer at their place last year. Very close. It took a late game touchdown from Brady Ford to a wide receiver for the Panthers, Logan Frank, to win that football game. If that doesn't happen, Southview's there. But this is that game where they can make that statement, and people have to start taking Southview seriously. I'm going to go with the Cougars in this one, and I think it's close because I do think Findlay's going to rally and they're going to have a better effort this week. But man, this is one of those that I almost wish, if I wasn't calling the game that we're calling, I almost wish I could be at that game because I am so intrigued to see how that plays out on Friday as a high school football fan. That's just going to be one where I'm probably going to bug the crap out of you asking for scoring updates on it because I'm really curious to see from two factors. One is the Southview angle. Can they, as I said, can they make that jump? But can Findlay put this thing back together? Because time is going to run out here. Week 6 is when the divisional games start. And if they're not in a good spot, it's going to be a long year in Hancock County.
Speaking of games that we'll be calling, we move on to our last game of the week. It is Clay at Whitmer. 6:30 pregame with a 7 o'clock kickoff Friday night live on Q1055 here in Toledo. And once again, a really good Clay team comes in 2-0, and a Whitmer team comes in reeling after a loss to Central Catholic. Is this another rebound game for Whitmer, or can Clay bring the bucket back for the first time in how long? I think I was in high school the last time it was
the
out
last
there.
time the Little Brown Jug was in Oregon, Ohio was 2005. That was the last time the Brown Jug stayed on the east side. This one intrigues me on a lot of different levels. One is, as you said, and like we talked with John about, this would be an upset. I don't want to disparage Clay. This would be a pretty epic upset. I don't think anyone gives Clay much of a chance. Not that Clay's not a good football team, because they very much are, but they don't have the horses that Whitmer has in the stable. They've got some really good ones, but Whitmer just hits you with so many different athletes on the field. But this is a Clay team with Mason Heinschlick quarterback, with Troy Hazuda and Hudson Byers, with Tickemeyer at running back, and they had Braden Schultz, I think it is, at wide receiver. That's a group that I think could shock Whitmer. If Whitmer comes out and they sleepwalk into this game, which is very possible, Clay absolutely can walk out of Whitmer with a win on Friday. Absolutely could. This reminds me, if to use a college reference, this reminds me of like when a really good Cincinnati team goes into Ohio State, or a really good Toledo team goes into Mississippi
Michigan?
State.
Oh,
well, Michigan, you could say. No, they upset somebody a couple of years ago. Maybe it was Arkansas.
yes, they were. Yeah.
So that's one of those games where if you don't, Arkansas on paper against Toledo was better. Ohio State on paper is better than Cincinnati. But if you're not ready to play and you allow that Clay team to hang around, they are good enough to win. And that's where Whitmer has to be dangerous. Ken Winters, I think, knows this. And I think he knows that when you come out on Friday, you're going to learn a lot about this Whitmer team from a mental standpoint. And that, to me, is more important about this Whitmer team moving forward. I know Whitmer's going to win at least 7 games. I think you could go ahead and pencil that in. What those 7 games are, I couldn't tell you. Obviously, people are hoping it's more than 7. People are hoping that they don't lose again the rest of the year. But worst case scenario, they're a 7-3 football team. When you look at that, that's not good enough with the talent that Whitmer has. They're going to be in the playoffs regardless. If they want to make that run, as I was saying, how do you respond to adversity? And I think that's the number one question for this Whitmer team. And if I'm being completely honest, it hasn't been great. in recent years. Probably the best response I saw was the way that they rebounded from that Southview game last year and went into Anthony Wayne week and dominated Anthony Wayne, and then followed that up with a win against Perrysburg. That was the best stretch I have seen mentally from a Whitmer football team probably since 2017. And I've been around Whitmer for a long time, and I know this is turning into a Whitmer segment. I don't mean it to, but this, I think, is that intriguing about this Buckeye division. If you see Whitmer come out and they play the way that they did last year, where they jumped out to like a 42-0 lead early, and then Clay kind of got back into it, made it closer than what it really was, then, okay, Whitmer is still really good, and they're still easily the pick to win the Buckeye division. If they come out and they win a squeaker, and this isn't taking anything away from Clay, they win a squeaker, or if they don't show up, and I don't know. And this Clay team is good enough to win. And John Galyas will have his kids ready. He'll have them believing it. Those seniors are going to want this one more than anything, because this is the one that they can stick their flag in and say, we are for real, and we can upset you, and we are as good as any team in this league. So it's a trap game for Whitmer of the highest order. Whitmer does not come in like they did a year ago, where they're desperate for that first win, and they thought they were going to get the one last week, and they didn't. So how do you respond to that? And I think that's the number one question.
A game that'll cap off an action-packed week 3 in the Northern Lakes League, one that we'll keep you apprised of throughout the night. If you tune in, Q105, like I said, starting at 6:30, 7 o'clock kickoff, live from Whitmer Memorial Stadium.
Yeah, our friends over at Car Stereo 1 kick off our tailgate show at 6:30, and Justin Keller and myself and you will be there, excited to call that game. And I do mean that little brown jug. It's kind of funny. I made the joke about the Irish Night, but that does not mean the same thing that it did when I was in high school, because the guys haven't seen it. And same thing with that little brown jug. It's hard to espouse the rivalry angle when it hasn't been much of a rivalry. It's been pretty one-sided. So really curious to see what Whitmer team shows up on Friday. As you said, pregame 6:30, kickoff 7 o'clock. That'll do it for this week of NLL Weekly. Make sure, again, if you want to watch this back, you can check it out on YouTube. We tape every Wednesday around 7 o'clock. Looking forward to having another coach on next week. Going to try and have some different folks on throughout the year. Going to try and get some of the folks from soccer as well over the next few weeks to kind of talk about that piece and how exciting that sport is. If you don't know soccer in the Northern Lakes League, both of those divisions came down to the final week last year as well. On the soccer side, on the boys side, girls side is always good as well. So just a lot of fun things to talk about with the Northern Lakes League in the coming weeks. So again, you can check us out here on YouTube, 7 o'clock on Wednesdays. Or if you don't, you can always watch it back on YouTube. Everything gets archived after we're done taping. And then also you can look at Apple, Spotify, and iHeart. Search NLL Weekly, and we are on that platform as well as wherever you get your podcasts. So make sure, you check us out on all of those spots. Thank you to John Galyas. Really always appreciate talking with him. Love chatting with him. Again, one of those great people that is a coach around here, and a guy that I've gotten to know better over the years, and just really glad that I get a chance to speak with him and get a chance to talk with him. And also big thank you to Dan, as always, helping us out, keeping us running on time, and pitching in as he always does. So always fun to do this with Dan. So thank you to that. Thank you for you to listening to this podcast as well. Make sure, again, you check us out. Leave us a like, subscribe to us on YouTube as well, NLL Weekly. All those help us with our ratings and all that different stuff. So make sure you do that. So we will see you in week number 4. Can't believe we're already saying that. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.